Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special legal compliance session. And we are focusing on the coronavirus and public health impacts for the community services sector. My name is Nihal, Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here at Kaizen Law Firm, and we welcome all of the Geneva 360 agencies that are joining us from around the country today. This session is obviously focused around the coronavirus and the legal impacts and questions that are coming out of it for agencies, and I'll come to those, some of those questions that people have asked us over the last few weeks, and these are in fact growing. We are looking to clarify a lot of these questions, direct you to specific areas that you may need to also look at, and also provide you with, I'm going to say, a bit of a line in the sand around some of the legal areas and where they currently stand now, by giving you a legal, what we're calling as a legal practice guide. This will be in a Word document that you can actually use within your agency and also look as a reference guide itself. And let me just bring that up. So part of that was that we've drafted this up for your agency. It does cover a lot of the areas that we're going to cover off today, but also will be updated from time to time, no doubt, as this unfolds in the coming weeks and months. That said, as always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all come from today. While this session is being run by a webinar, we do pay our respects accordingly to the traditional owners of the land from around the country. So what are some of the legal topics that agencies have asked us? These really focus on some of the operational questions, and we're going to actually look at these today. Some of these include how do we document leave if an employee is not sick when it comes to the coronavirus? Is it counted as sick leave when they're in fact not sick? What happens to service contracts that you might have with other companies? Some of these includes where you might provide housing services or work particularly in the disability space as well too, aged care being another, where you might actually rely on other agencies or other contractors to deliver services. This might even obviously include even cleaning staff as well too. And again, what happens if quite simply people can't perform these services or get anybody else to actually do it? Also, are there work health and safety issues? A lot of agencies have actually raised this as a really concerning point. Can they force people to stay at home in quarantine? What information should you be collecting from staff? Does this change over time as well too? Other questions that people have asked is around insurance coverage, and also looking at whether your current insurance coverage is adequate and whether you need to contact your insurers around this. And this has been one of the real grey areas at the moment. Other things that people have asked us, and these are not in any particular order, but really almost a scatterboard of issues that people have raised, even down to things like whether you need to have an emergency credentialing and scope of practice guidelines in place in the event that some staff are simply able to not deliver services, and you need other staff to actually, I'm going to say, step into different roles. Along also all of these other legal issues that have come up is agencies asking whether they can actually screen not only clients but staff. Obviously, people are talking about quarantining people into their own homes and the likes. But what happens if you have a client that is quarantined at home? What is your obligation? Do you still need to send staff out knowing that that person is in fact quarantined? Or what happens if your staff member shows up to when they're delivering outreach services only to find that somebody is quarantined as well too? And this kind of I'm going to say, wraps back into work health and safety issues as well. So we're going to look at these issues, and as always, we will open up the phone lines and computer lines at the end of this session. This session is being recorded, so staff that may not be able to attend today's session, so they can certainly go back and listen to it. No doubt we will be holding other sessions in the coming weeks to keep people updated about any changes on key specific topics that you need to be aware about. We also note as well too that some of the news and press that are beating this up, on one hand, you do see information around clients and people that are affected as well too. And in that, you then also see effectively people on the news and the government saying, okay, everybody keep calm. So there is an almost quite a dramatic difference in what the news is portraying the impact of the coronavirus across different areas. We also note that some attendees joining us today are already in self-isolation. So we are going to focus on some of the legal issues that are facing agencies at this present time. As I mentioned, there is a legal practice guide that we have drafted that covers all the topics that we are talking about today. And should there be further updates that we need to make, then we will also be updating this guide and give you the key points that you need to be aware about. Some of the things that I need to also cover off in terms of the legal issues that we are looking at is to put it into context around some of the guidelines that are there. My background, which many of you are aware of, is around public health in epidemiology and preventive medicine, as well as the law. And part of this, in looking at this particular, drafting this legal guide for you, and also providing the information in this session, was to put a lot of the legal issues into context around, firstly, well, what is the incidence distribution and possible ways to control from what we know at the moment about the coronavirus and how it affects the health, in what actions you need to take when we talk of things like work health and safety issues. Or if we're talking about client services, or if we're talking about staff being quarantined at home, then again, looking at a preventive medical approach in terms of the incidence and distribution and other factors that may actually impact on how we actually use the law to actually address some of these issues at this time. Equally, we need to also consider, which we've also done in these slides, and again, we'll actually send out these slides for your agency to use and as a reference guide, if you like, as well, around some of the health policy and planning documents that government departments have also sent. So when we look at some of the laws around this, it is a maze, and no doubt a lot of agencies are confused around, well, where do we in fact start? There are work health and safety issues. There are fair work and employment regulations. There's also privacy and confidentiality of staff information. And one agency raised, what happens if a staff member that may need to be quarantined at home doesn't want other people to know about it? Other areas like contractual issues and indemnity cover has equally come up, but certainly we will unpack these today. Equally, there is also a lot of documents that are out there. Some of these are quite useful from the department, but they don't go so far as saying, well, how can you actually use them in your agency as well? Some of them cover things like work health and safety. There's also references in the fair work areas and guidance, practice notes, and practice legal notes as well too, that when we have had to look at them, it is just written in real legal language that just, I'm going to say, takes us a bit of time, even from a legal point, to go back and understand exactly what on earth they're talking about. Some of them from a work health and safety point of view as well too, at times talks about the work health and safety laws, but then doesn't give you the operational kind of items that your agency really needs to consider. So we have, where relevant, actually brought a lot of this information together in the legal practice guide and also in these slides to assist you with it. If there are parts of this that I'm going to say have been extracted, and I'll direct you to those, we don't believe this is the time to reinvent the wheel and reword things. We'll actually take direct extracts out of different parts to make sure that it is consistent around some of where the regulators are actually talking about from a legal point of view. So let's put this into context around what we're actually talking about here, because there is a lot of misinformation around it. I'm going to move through this part of the slides pretty quickly, but this is really, the purpose of this is just so that we're all on the same page around what we're actually talking about. And this information was taken between the reference guides from the World Health Organization, but more importantly, also the Australian Departments of Health as well. So in terms of the coronavirus, it is a new virus that can cause an infection in people, including severe respiratory illnesses. We're not going to go into the details around this. This is not a clinical presentation slide. This is really around focused on the legal issues and how your agency can actually address some of these. So with it, it has originated from causes ranging from the common cold to more severe diseases such as Middle East respiratory syndrome as well, and the previously known SARS. Now, the common signs of infection, and we're going to use this information in some of our legal compliance areas that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Now, it is important just to know what the common signs of infection actually are. They are listed here. Some of them include fever, cough, respiratory symptoms, shortness of breath, and breathing difficulties. As I said, we'll use this when it comes to some of the legal assessments that we're going to do to support you in your areas like work health and safety areas. The standard recommendations to prevent infection spread include regular hand washing, covering your mouth and nose, and when coughing and sneezing, thoroughly cooking meat and eggs, and avoid close contact with anyone showing symptoms of respiratory illness, such as coughing and sneezing. In terms of the virus spread, and this will be important around when we talk of the work health and safety and also some of the fair work areas that you need to consider for your staff. So in terms of containing the spread and really from a preventive medical point of view, it means that really the spread of this virus occurs through close contact with an infected person, mostly face-to-face or within a household. It cannot jump across a room or be carried for long distances in the air, which means that this is important when we talk about even working within an office space. If somebody does come into the office and then realizes that they could have the symptoms of this. Close contact means greater than 15 minutes face-to-face, or the sharing of a closed space for more than 2 hours with a person in a confirmed case. And this is where we do see the news beating this up around airplane travel as well too, because it is defined as a closed space. A close contact could include any person meeting any of the following criteria. This includes living in the same household or household-like setting, and this does include obviously schools as well, and direct contact with the body fluids or laboratory specimens of a confirmed case, or a person who spent 2 hours or longer in the same room. It's important to know that face-to-face contact for more than 15 minutes with the case in any other setting is not listed above. And so this could include quite simply your office space that you may have. It could include outreach workers that may go and visit people as well too, or clients and the like. So this is important that you should be aware of actually looking broader than just simply people at home. How to prepare for self-isolation, and we'll use this again, as I mentioned, when going through the process of the work health and safety areas for you, and what you should expect staff to actually do. So everyone should now take steps to prepare for the possibility of transmission of infection. We've said in Victoria, but obviously this includes other areas from around the country, Queensland in particular, where there have been a number of cases, Tasmania, where we're having people join us today as well too. And also make a plan on, the department has recommended that you make a plan on how and your family would have to manage if you needed to stay at home for 2 or 3 weeks, and they've given a list of items here. What we've seen in this from a policy point of view for your agency is if people are having to spend time, at least they're mentioning 2 or 3 weeks at home, do you have things like your deed of delegation policy up to date in the event that somebody is taken, I'm going to say, offline for a considerable period of time? Who's in fact going to manage this process? And these are some of the questions that we've also raised in the legal practice guide for you to actually think about, and especially around some of the management decisions and how is that actually done, and critical areas as well. If you are asked to isolate, again, it's around people that have traveled recently to China, Iran, the Republic of Korea and Italy, and we'll use this as part of our assessment guidelines as well. Who needs to isolate? Well, we've given you the time and people who've recently been traveling or come into close contact as well. Some of the other recommendations is around staying at home and hotel, what you should be doing, and what you should be doing those times as well. The department has equally asked people to monitor symptoms. When in isolation, monitor yourself, including fever, cough, or shortness of breath. We've actually extended this out to actually say monitoring symptoms of staff that may have it, and we've actually developed a practice form that can be rolled out immediately today for you. And so in terms of monitoring the symptoms, it's not also of staff that may already have this, but also people that may be at direct risk. We do have guidelines on what to do if you do get sick as well too, and what the process is in terms of preventing the spread. And most of this is around good, safe hand hygiene, and obviously making sure that you stay away from as many people as possible as you can. In terms of advice of living with others that may live with you as well too, again, it's making sure that you avoid as much close contact as possible. In terms of cleaning, the department's policy at the moment is around making sure that you regularly wash surfaces that are frequently touched. Now, while this is applied to households, equally, we're recommending that from a work health and safety point of view, agencies actually pick this up and making sure that common areas that are frequently used are in fact cleaned very, very regularly around this. And again, detergents and disinfectants actually used. Managing the 14-day isolation, again, these are the checklists, and I'll send you these slides. We don't need to go through these directly today. Now, the clinical governance side of this, in terms of where we've now looked at the clinical side and we're now looking at the clinical governance side, and this leads directly into some of the legal areas that your agency needs to really consider. The department has taken the stance that it's divided this up into case definition, clinical criteria, and assessments for staff. Now, the case definition around this is that if the staff member satisfies clinical and epidemiological criteria, they are classified as a suspected case. Now, on this, the clinical criteria being that if they have a fever or acute respiratory infection, shortness of breath or cough, or without a fever, and also have had travel to a country that's considered to pose a risk in the 14 days before the onset of what they've identified, or they've had close contact in the last 14 days with a confirmed case, as we mentioned before, then they are effectively considered to be at risk. What we have set up directly for your agency, and I've had permission from an agency this morning to actually just share this, is that you have what we've set up on your dashboards, and we can push this live for you immediately today, is what we've called a Corona self-assessment form. And each staff, and this will actually help you with some of the legal issues that I'm going to cover off around your work health and safety obligations. Quite simply, what we have set up for you is around the staff can actually do a self-assessment directly. It comes up with the person that's logged in. I'm just logged in as this person here as our test user. We've got the date, we've got the time of when it's actually being reported as well too. We've got the clinical criteria and the epidemiological criteria. We can rename this if you want to make it a bit more user-friendly, but this is taken directly from the department's point of view as well, and answering a yes or a no to each of these answers. And I'll come back to this particular form. Now, once people have actually answered this, it then goes into the manager's responsibility. And I will just park this form right here, because what we're talking about here is being able to screen existing staff that may be at risk around this. And if a staff member thinks they are at risk, now your agency from a legal point of view needs to be able to start to capture some of this information. If you're already quarantined at home and dialing in, again, this information can also be used in terms of, well, what is the documentation? How we actually manage this? What have we actually said in terms of allowing staff to work from home? And I'll come to that in a minute. So what are some of the legal issues around this? And now that we've got the context around what we're actually in some ways dealing with from a baseline point of view, we need to actually look at, well, what are some of the major legal questions that people are actually asking us? So what happens if an employee or their family member is sick with coronavirus? Now, we've gone through and looked at specifically across this, all of the Fair Work guidelines and legal directives. We've checked the work health and safety in each state and territory. We've checked the department's position on what they're advising agencies to do, and mapped all of this together for you. And again, this is in the legal practice guide as well as the slides that we'll send across. Now, part of this is that full and part-time employees who can't come to work because they are sick can take paid sick leave. If an employee needs to look after their family member or member of their household who is sick with coronavirus or suffering from an unexpected emergency, they are entitled to take paid carers leave as well too. Casual employees are entitled to take 2 days of unpaid carers leave per occasion. Full and part-time employees can take unpaid carers leave if they have no paid or sick carers leave left. So from a Fair Work point of view, it's important to note that people can use their sick leave in this or carers leave if they have another family member or person that they take care of that they need, and that can be done immediately. We'll cover off the work health and safety issues in a minute as well. Now, if an employee is stuck overseas or requires to be quarantined, now again, the obligation is for the employee to contact yourselves directly if they are unable to attend work because they either can't return from overseas or are required to enter quarantine because of the coronavirus. At this point, I will add that some agencies have asked us, can we restrict people from traveling to certain countries? With it, it's not a directive around saying you restrict people from traveling to those countries. What we will say is that they have to be quarantined if they do go to those countries. It's part of this is to warn people of the risks, but if they do do it, then effectively they will need to be quarantined on their return as part of the current department's own policy guidelines on this. The Fair Work Act does not have specific rules for these kinds of situations at all. Now, when we talk of people coming to their own arrangements around this, this can be a policy directive. It overlaps directly with your own agency's work health and safety obligations, where you need to provide a safe work environment for all staff and also clients as well too. So if there is a potential exposure around this, then you can actually have a policy directive from your agency that prevents people during this time to actually travel overseas, but also go so far as actually saying if they do, then they will be quarantined as part of a precautionary process that you have. Sub-agencies have also asked them if after 14 days that they, if they have travelled, whether they can actually ask for a clearance from a medical practitioner to say that they don't have it. So it's almost a double confirmation. And that can be as part of your policy directive as well. And we've actually put that in the practice guide to actually recommend that, because I think in this certain situation, quite a stronger stance on this, not just requiring people to not only, if they travel, that they do remain in quarantine, but also that they do get a check from their GP to in fact say that they haven't in fact got it as part of the verification check as well. This also means that, again, going back, when we have a look at this form again, that if they don't have it, but they've completed this information, you've then got the documentation to actually show that you've taken the precautionary steps that you need to do as well too. It means that as part of this as well, if an employee wants to stay home as a precaution, then again, they will need to make a request to work from home or take some form of paid or unpaid leave, such as annual leave or long service leave. Now, these requests are subject to the normal leave application process in the workplace. So if they want to stay at home as a precaution, and again, you as an employee, as an employer, can make this assessment as part of the usual process. And this position is absolutely supported through Fair Work rules and directives as well. Employees are encouraged to discuss their level of risk of contracting coronavirus with their work health and safety rep as well, and also their GP. Now, with this, we will add that this is where it starts to get into the grey area around work health and safety and what your position is and what their position is as part of your employee. Now, if an employee wants their staff to stay home, so what we were looking at before was if the employee wants to stay home as a precaution, but now what you want to do as an agency is want their staff to stay at home. Now, this is where we do move into the work health and safety legislation. So we've shifted slightly from Fair Work, and now we're looking at the work health and safety legislation. So under work health and safety laws, your agency is required to ensure the health and safety of your staff and others at your workplace. And of course, they use the words as reasonably practicable. Now, workers also have responsibilities under these laws as well too. If an employee is at risk of infection from the coronavirus, you should request that the employee seek the medical clearance from a doctor and possibly to work from home if it is possible for them to do so. It may well be quite simply that because of the person's role, they are unable to do that. You should also consider and look at the enterprise bargaining agreements, if you do have those, or what awards and employees of contracts that you may already have around this. What we're suggesting is that you update your workplace policies as soon as possible, if you haven't already done this, to actually look at the specific roles that people have and how or what they may well need if they were to work from home. There may well be some roles that quite simply cannot be done as a work from home type of role at all. And this may well be some roles like intake, and you may actually need to change your business process in terms of what and who actually needs to do what in the office space as well. And I'm sure that may well open up some questions as well. In terms of the employer, and if you want your staff again around working from home and how this could work, you can't just stand an employee down without pay if they can't do useful work because either there's an equipment breakdown or there's some sort of stoppage at work. The most common issues that you need to be aware of is, well, what process do we have to actually deal with this all together? It may well be that you look at some sort of holiday arrangement or leave or annual leave days or the like. There may well be a whole range of other policy changes that you want to make in order for this to happen. But effectively, what we are suggesting here is that it is based on a risk assessment process and what your expectations are to make those clear to your staff in your agency. So when we're looking at the work health and safety obligations, again, let's be quite clear that under work health and safety, the model rules talk about making sure that you reasonably reduce any risks that are reasonably practicable to avoid. And there are some very clear legal responsibilities that employers need to be aware of, particularly in this situation, and making sure that one of those is that making sure that workers are aware of the isolation and quarantine periods. And again, this is some of the information that you can make very available, if you haven't already, quickly to staff in terms of what the quarantine periods are. And we've covered these in the slides. We also suggest you put this information on your website in terms of having a consistent message across not only your internal staff, but also the community as well too, and what you're expecting your staff to do as well. It means also clarifying when staff should not attend work. So if there is identified as an outbreak in a team or a site, then obviously that's one example around that. Providing clear advice to your staff about actions they should take if they become unwell as well too. And as I mentioned, that's covered off in the previous slides around this. So you can see that some of the clinical information that we're talking about actually directly overlaps with a lot of this work health and safety items where legal issues we're discussing now. In terms of looking at eliminating or minimising international travel, again, pulling from the Australian government's website, and also providing regular updates to workers and staff about the situation and any changes to your organisation policies and procedures. And also having a contingency plan to manage staff absences as well is absolutely key as part of this process. The other ones is that, which a number of other agencies have started to do, is provide workers with information and links to relevant services should they require it. So by doing these kind of six or so points, what you've got is just a very clear direction on what you're actually needing to do as to meet your legal compliance obligations under work health and safety obligations. Now, I did mention that we're going to jump back to the form that's on Gemba for your agency to use. Now, what we have done here to make sure to help you out, and this is not any additional cost for your agency, this is part of your Gemba system that you can access, and we can simply switch this on. So let's be quite clear about this. This is already available and can be made available today for you. So quite simply, what you've got is the clinical staff self-assessment that the department policy requires people to actually complete and do. We have included, as I mentioned, the clinical criteria and also the epidemiological criteria. We can change these headings to make it a bit more user-friendly for your agency. What we have done, though, is also extend to ensure you meet your work health and safety obligations to not just ask the questions from a staffing point of view for their own assessment, but what we have also included in here, and this was what my direction was from a public health point of view, is to actually look at broadening it out to actually ask the questions, have they actually come into close contact through their friends or families or events that they might have gone to? And it's important for us to keep track of this particular criteria. It broadens the net out enough so that way, from a work health and safety point of view, you can effectively start to monitor what's going on from staff. And staff can actually complete this, and, which I will add, what they'll see is only their information in here. Equally, once that's done, you can then have the section that we talked about just now for the manager to complete. And what this gives you is the checklist of all of the items in the event that something does arise. So how do you know that you've met your work health and safety obligations? Well, now you've got your checklist of steps to actually take as required by WorkSafe and also the department. And there are about 10 different checklists. Some of them are quite detailed. Again, this is coming directly from both the department and also WorkSafe in terms of what you need it. Now, it may be that you equally get they get a doctor's certificate saying that they're clear, or the test that they run to ensure that they've got, or to verify that they've got COVID-19 comes back negative. Then again, they can actually upload that directly, and you've then got that as part of your work health and safety obligations as well, and you can show that you've met that. For employees also have, let's be quite clear, a legal responsibility themselves in this case. And again, WorkSafe have been quite clear in saying, well, they also have to make sure that they wash their hands, they make sure that they cover their mouth. So if you do see people or observe staff, and it could also include contractors as well too in this case, remember, then you can actually pull them up and actually make sure that they actually do follow their legal obligations themselves. And equally making sure what steps that they actually take in the event that they need to. Now, there are areas in terms of controlling the risks to health. And again, we've covered some of this off already in terms of what needs to happen from a clinical point of view. The other question that people have asked us is in regards to privacy of this information. So let's say we have had a staff member that has come up and identified that they do have the virus, but they don't want other people to know about it. With it, in this case, there is an obligation for you, if you do find this information out, to make the notification to the department, and this is there is allowance for this under the Health Services Act itself. Equally, if there is a request by staff not to tell other staff about what they have done, then again, there are ways to manage the privacy of your staff in terms of saying that. And again, this may well be covered and extended within your own privacy statement. Equally though, you are able, and I would recommend it, not just from a legal point of view, whether that be under work health and safety, but also from a clinical or community services coordination point to start screening your clients for some of these questions as well, particularly for agencies that do disability services work or outreach work as well too, asking the questions around whether they have come into contact with people that have travelled to those particular areas, or equally if they have any of the presenting symptoms, and ask clients to also inform you about it as well too. This is the way that you should be managing this situation at this time. It is recommended by the departments in terms of people doing so. And if clients are being quarantined into your home, then you do need to make sure that this information is being recorded as part of this whole process as well. And no doubt that will affect whether people are actually going to provide support services to their clients. Already there are questions being raised in how this may occur, in particularly around the disability support workers areas and advocacy support areas, particularly also in housing, and also in some agencies where they case coordinate some of the care for clients and provide the out-of-home care services as well. But in terms of screening the clients, it is absolutely important that you start doing that as well. As part of this, this leads into also looking at some of your service contracts and funding agreements as well. Some of these should be, let me just bring this back for 1 minute, please. Thank you. So first of all, just around the service contracts, you may find that some of the other providers that you deal with may also be impacted on this particular virus as well too. And we would also recommend that you start contacting some of your service providers and what is the systems for them to inform you about whether they are able to continue performing, and what are their risk management processes in place. Some of these contracts, before we get to it, may well be that where there is such a, what we call a force majeure event, and really what this means is that whether the outbreak falls within the protection offered by this relevant clause. Now, what this could be is that where the contracting party experiences a reasonable event that is completely out of their control, it actually prevents them from performing those contractual obligations. Now, this, for many agencies, this could actually have a on not only to your clients, but also to your reports back to the department in meeting your certain KPIs as well too. And so some of these areas, and I'll focus on two areas, one being disability support workers and also GP engagement services and outreach services. For those two particular areas, this is critically important because it may well be fall on just one person, or a number of contracts might fall only on one person to actually deliver them. And so as part of this, you may well be under a force majeure event where you can't actually get any claims for payments coming back in the event that those services weren't delivered, because it was an event almost completely out of that person's control. Now, the way to, in fact, manage this is to actually look at, well, what service agreements do we have, and do we have the capacity to be notified about this in advance of these things happening. But again, it's almost going through a legal screening process to identify some of your top tier service contracts that you may well have. Equally, it may become, just quite as I mentioned, impossible to perform some of these contracts. And again, from an agency point, you really need to have a look at some of these top tier contracts that your agency needs to actually have a look at. I've already briefly mentioned some of the implications that you may have to funding arrangements and targets and KPIs in terms of reports that may need to happen. I think the last one has just occurred as well too for some agencies around the Commonwealth reporting. But again, from a legal point of view, it is something that you also need to consider in terms of making the contact with the departments on this. I know we've already prompted some agencies to do this and provide due notice, because at the end of the day, if they are focusing on targets and KPIs, we need to make sure that in advance of this, and it's already starting to occur, that the departments and local regional officers are also across some of the factors that may be causing problems with the reporting. And as I mentioned, this will come out. We've got a legal service contract checklist tool in our legal practice guide that will actually help you with that as well too. So looking at some of the top tier, and here it is here, some of the top tier service contracts and which ones you should also be looking at as well. These include these contract clauses that I mentioned, and as part of that policy position is that to actually have service providers insert some of these items into their as part of a service contract that you have. We've actually suggested to some community service organisations do it as a broad and blanket policy as well by taking out these. There are actually a couple more over the next slide as well too, in terms of looking at specific clauses, covering off certain areas that your agency needs to be across in order to protect itself from other service arrangements that you have as well too. Now, the last areas that we just wanted to cover off, particularly around this, was reviewing the insurance policies. There are a number of different policies that you may well have, and we've listed a couple of these here. One of the things, and I've listed runoff insurance for directors and officers right at the top around this, and a few people have already asked me when we discussed this slides why we focused on this. One of the things that you need to be across is that any decisions that your directors and officers make now in terms of fair work, work health and safety, deeds of delegation, privacy, clinical outcomes or in clinical governance practice guides, need to make sure that the directors and officers, including the CEOs and managers, are covered appropriately. Let's be quite clear that the runoff insurance actually is there to protect directors and officers from decisions they've made now after they've left those positions. So if they don't meet their obligations now, and there are issues that have led to inappropriate work health and safety issues or inappropriate service arrangements and the likes, then effectively at a later stage you can pull directors and officers back into actually answering questions around what and why they made decisions at the time. When we have made contact with a lot of the insurers around this, and again, we've seen this consistently across overseas as well too, particularly in the UK, which is similar insurance coverage to Australia in terms of agencies and the likes. It is actually unclear on whether business insurance policies are still likely to cover losses. Unless many policies tend to only work if your firms and if the virus is actually found on site. There's yet to be a specific, well, from what we've seen, position from insurers in this regard at this point in time, but no doubt this will change as we get closer to the 30th of June for when most renewals are actually due. So in terms of legal recommendations to agencies and controlling the risks, we've given us a number of 6 key points to actually look at. Some of these include updating a number of key policies, and we've got the legal practice guide to support you with that. Also looking at reviewing your contract reporting and privacy policies as well too. We've also included information for updating of your website as well too, for what to do, but also what not to do is equally important. And including in this is to not initially visit the GP, but make that call directly to the department in terms of making sure that that initial assessment is done. Also looking at some of the insurance policies, we've put that down a little bit further, but actually using the legal practice guide to actually give you the key insertions into some of your policies. And if you do have any questions, you can come back to us around that. As I mentioned, one of the other areas that you can also do is we do have this, what we've called Corona self-assessment tool that you can see here, which allows you to actually have staff complete this, and you've got then the audit trail of everything that goes on in the event that something does occur, as well as what the specific manager needs to do and when they need to do it, and identify whether it's a low, medium or high risk in this circumstance, and then effectively follows through of exactly what they need to do to meet their work health and safety obligations as part of this process. What we also have for agencies as well, which you can see, is under the disaster management side, which we're opening up for agencies to use, is to actually manage their deed of delegations as well as disaster resources, as well as managing volunteers or managing assessments from purely a disaster point of view as well. And this is already being used overseas as well too. And you can set up your own projects, can be called coronavirus projects equally, but also allows you to manage your own assets as well too. For example, if you do have a number of things like toiletries, disinfectants, toilet paper, etc., you can manage all of your assets directly from here as well. And this is also available for your agency to use, and we suggest that you can actually log in and start to use these resources to manage your legal compliance obligations. With it, we will just open up the phone lines, and more than happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that people might have. At this stage, we will just stop the recording. And certainly if you do have any questions, you can contact us directly on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com. Equally, I will add that we have also sent out my direct mobile number for any after hours questions that agencies have, particularly where they are needing legal support around some of these issues that we have already raised today. With that, we will just hold